Hey Mustangs, in this video we're going to be taking a look at the role of ATP in metabolism. So, first, big ideas that you must know in order to really get what's going on with ATP. So first of all living things need a constant supply of energy. Metabolism is the breakdown and building of molecules inside your body, and you need a constant supply of energy in order for that to continue. If you don't get that constant supply of energy, all the chemical reactions that are part of your metabolism will stop and you will therefore die. So you need a constant supply of energy in order to keep all these chemical reactions going inside your body. Autotrophs are the ones that initially bring energy into living things, and autotrophs are the only ones that can take energy from the sun and convert it from solar energy into chemical energy. So remember, chemical energy is energy stored in the bonds of molecules, and autotrophs are the ones that do that. And you should remember that the process that autotrophs use in order to trap the sun's energy and convert it into chemical energy is photosynthesis. So during photosynthesis, solar energy is trapped by the autotrophs, or the producers, and they produce G3P, which can then be used to make glucose, and that can be used to make other organic molecules, lipids, proteins, and even nucleic acids. So autotrophs are the ones that start everything off. They're the ones that bring energy into living systems. Organic molecules are what is passed from organism to organism in a food chain. So when you think about a food chain, you start with the producer. All food chains start with a producer, and they trap the energy, pass it on to usually herbivores to carnivores or omnivores, and so on and so on. The energy that's being passed along when an organism eats is in the form of organic molecules. Now the big idea here is that organisms don't use the energy in those organic molecules. So that when we say that they get energy from their food, we're saying that they're getting these organic molecules, and that's energy. But organisms don't use those organic molecules directly. So they don't use carbohydrates, lipids, proteins directly as a source of energy. So it's not like they break it apart and use the energy, boom, to make to get their chemical reactions done. So the energy that cells prefer to use, that living cells prefer to use here on our planet, is ATP. So the energy that is stored in organic molecules during the process of cellular respiration, the energy in the organic molecules is taken out and put into ATP instead. And ATP is much easier to get energy out of, so it's known usually as the currency, the energy currency of cells, of living things. All right, so the structure of ATP, if you take a look at ATP here, you see that it has three main parts. It has a base, it has a sugar, and then it has three phosphates that are attached to it. And that's where it gets its name, ATP, adenosine tri meaning three, phosphate. Now, one thing we need to take a look at is ADP and ATP. So they're actually the same molecule. The only difference between ADP and ATP is if it has that extra phosphate at the end. So ADP, adenosine di meaning 2-phosphate, has only 2 phosphates, while ATP has 3 phosphates. So what happens is you can basically, let's say this is ADP and you have only the 2 phosphates. Well, ATP is when you add a third. So ADP becomes ATP when you add a phosphate on, that third phosphate. But if you break that third phosphate off, now you're back to ADP again. And that's what's going to happen inside of our cells. That last phosphate is constantly going to be added on and broken off, added on and broken off. So you have, again, ADP, you add a phosphate, now you have ATP. And they both actually store energy. So if you take a look, they both store energy, but ADP doesn't have as much energy stored in it. So this is chemical energy we're looking at. ADP does have energy in there, but if you look, this is like fully charged, like a fully charged battery. So when you add that third phosphate on, there's a lot of energy there. And that's the chemical energy. That's the energy that can be used when that's broken off and provide free energy to get your chemical reactions going and keep them going. So organic molecules will always be broken apart, and energy will be stored by adding that phosphate on, that third bond, and you have energy that can be used to run your chemical reactions. So if we take a look at this here, whenever you break off a phosphate, that is hydrolysis. Okay, so when you break that phosphate off, you use water in order to break that bond. That is hydrolysis. Adding the phosphate on is known as phosphorylation. Now, phosphorylation don't get confused on this. Anytime a phosphate is added onto a molecule, it is called phosphorylation. So here, though, specifically when we're looking at going between ADP, so remember ADP to ATP, when you break it off, that's hydrolysis. When you add it on, that's phosphorylation. And again, anytime you add on a phosphate, it's called phosphorylation. So when it comes to ATP, you should be asking yourself, how does the cell use it and what makes it so special? So cells will use ATP as storage in order to store and transfer energy. Now, when we say store and transfer energy, it's not long-term storage. This is actually short-term storage in order to store and then quickly transfer and use the energy to convert it, use it in anabolic and catabolic pathways. So ATP stores and transfers energy for a short period of time. And in order to really understand what makes it so special and why your cells prefer ATP over just the straight organic molecules that you get that have chemical energy, that actually have energy already in them, it has to do with its structure. So if you understand the structure of ATP, it makes sense why ATP is used over the organic molecules. So here we have a structure here. This is not ATP, this is AMP, adenosine monophosphate, mono meaning one. So AMP has only one single phosphate attached to it, and it has, like molecules do, it has chemical energy. So it has energy stored in it, but it's not what we're looking for. So here, if we add another phosphate to it, we get ADP, adenosine diphosphate. So di meaning two. So now this has two phosphates. Now there's more energy stored here, but the best one to use is ATP. So we add a third phosphate, adenosine triphosphate is what we have now. Okay. The more phosphates that are added on, the more unstable this molecule actually becomes. And there's energy stored in these bonds. So it took more energy was put in to add this third one than the second one or even this first one. So we had to put more energy here into creating this bond. So there's lots of energy stored between this second and third phosphate here. And when the cell needs to use this energy, simply break off the phosphate and that energy can be used. Okay, so it's this third phosphate that is key right here. It's the one that has the most energy. Now, it comes down to instability that makes ATP a really good molecule to store and transfer energy to be used in catabolic and anabolic pathways. So the instability, that easily pops off. That third phosphate easily pops off, and the energy stored in the bond there is the energy that can be used to drive other chemical reactions. So how exactly does it transfer energy? So that's a big thing too, okay? Does it just break off the phosphate and the energy gets used? Not quite so simple. So when you take off that phosphate, ATP becomes ADP again, and that's how energy gets released. But what really is the transfer of energy here is when the phosphate is taken off, that third phosphate is taken off and added to another molecule that's involved in the chemical reaction. So I'm going to give you an example in just a moment. Okay? So when phosphates get taken off and added to another one, we call that phosphorylation. So phosphorylation is adding phosphates onto a molecule, and what happens is this third phosphate gets broken off and added to another molecule, and we're phosphorylating the other molecule. Okay? When the other molecules become phosphorylated, that makes them more unstable and easier for reactions to occur. Now, the enzymes, the ATP doesn't just come up to a molecule and then give it its phosphate. There's enzymes that are needed to break that phosphate off and put it onto the other molecule. Any molecule that takes a phosphate and phosphorylates, puts it onto another molecule, is called a kinase. So any enzyme that does that is called a kinase. So you break that off, and this will be used to phosphorylate another molecule and destabilize it, and that provides the energy needed for chemical reactions to occur. Okay, so example here. Here we have no ATP being used in a chemical reaction, and in order to get these two molecules to combine, go from glutamic acid to ammonia to make glutamine, lots of energy has to be put in, a lot of energy. So a lot of energy has to be used to get these molecules to come together. But if you use ATP in the chemical reaction instead, so we know this is a chemical reaction. Let me go back real quick. We're breaking these apart and rearranging these into something new. So we know a chemical reaction is occurring. You have your reactants and your products here. So in order to make this more efficient and require less energy, you use ATP. So ATP has energy stored in it. The energy, remember, came from the organic molecules that organisms ate. So the energy in ATP originally came from carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, and we have energy now stored in the ATP. So in order to make this chemical reaction more efficient here and use less energy, the ATP is going to donate its phosphate, so it's an energy donor. So you would use a kinase to break off one of the phosphates and put it onto the glutamic acid. Now the glutamic acid has been phosphorylated. So this, anytime you add a phosphate onto a molecule, it's been phosphorylated. So this is phosphorylated. This is less stable now and more likely to react. And if it's more likely to react, that means it needs less energy for the chemical reaction to occur. So that's a good thing, all right? So basically, by transferring the phosphate, now you have energy here that can be used in the reaction. So you take this, our intermediate here, and you take it with what you want to react. So these are the reactants now. And because of this, this is now more likely to react. So the energy stored here that was transferred basically can be used to drive this reaction. Now there's less energy needed to get these two together because the energy is right there. The energy is right there. So you wind up with your final product as a result. So ATP can be reused over and over again, or we should say ADP, ATP can be used over and over again. So if you take a look here, ATP has a cycle where during cellular respiration, the energy that's stored in your organic molecules, the energy that's stored from the organic molecules you get from your food, proteins, carbohydrates, lipids, catabolic reactions. We're going to break apart those molecules, break apart those organic molecules that have energy stored in them. And when we do that during cellular respiration, we're going to store the energy in ATP. So cellular respiration, so I'll just put CR, occurs, and ATP then stores energy that was once stored in your organic molecules that you got from your food. Well, that ATP then is going to be used in anabolic reactions. So you're going to tear apart your organic molecules and get energy out of them, and then you're going to use that energy in order to make your own molecules. So the organic molecules you get from your food, it's proteins, it's carbohydrates, it's lipids, but it's not exactly what you need for your specific cells in your specific body. So that ATP is used in anabolic reactions to build the specific proteins, lipids, carbohydrates that you specifically need for your cells. So when these anabolic reactions happen, when you're building new molecules here, ATP gets broken apart. Okay, so ATP gets broken apart and you wind up with ADP plus the phosphate. But then that ADP and that phosphate can be used again to generate more ATP. So these molecules can be used again and again and again. And this is the same thing. Remember, this is just ATP, this is ADP. You break off the phosphate to use in anabolic reactions, and you got ADP and extra phosphate, and it can be used again and again. So it can be sent back for cellular respiration to occur and add more energy by adding on the phosphate there.